I'm not one to get scared easily. I've worked night shifts for years, always in sketchy places, motel front desks, late-night convenience stores, even the occasional diner. But that night, I'll never forget it. I don't know why I ended up there. Maybe it was the desperation after a rough day. Maybe it was the eerie, foggy night that made the road seem endless. But there I was, driving down a stretch of highway with nothing but the hum of my tires and the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist. That's when I saw it. An old diner, glowing faintly through the fog. The neon sign flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I should have kept driving, but I was starving and honestly, I was exhausted. So I pulled in. The diner's name was Maggie's Rest, but it didn't feel like a place for rest. Not at all. As I walked in, the bell above the door gave a quiet, mournful chime. The air was thick with the smell of grease and old coffee, and the low murmur of a jukebox playing an old country tune was the only sound. It was almost 2 a.m., but the place was almost full. Mostly older people, gray-haired men and women, hunched over their plates. A few seemed to be nodding off, their half-eaten meals sitting untouched. I walked up to the counter, trying to shake the strange feeling in my gut. The waitress, a woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, barely looked up from the menu in front of her. She had that look, exhausted, like she had seen too much. "Can I help you?" Her voice was flat, like she didn't care either way. "Yeah, just a coffee and whatever you recommend for breakfast," I said, trying to sound casual. She didn't say anything, just grabbed a mug, poured me coffee, and placed it in front of me. No smile, no welcome. I should have taken it as a warning sign, but I didn't. I took a sip, and that's when I noticed something. A man sitting at the far end of the diner, dressed in a faded leather jacket, his face hidden in the shadows, was staring directly at me. No, not just staring. Watching. He was watching me like he knew something I didn't. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard. The longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I felt. It wasn't just the man. There was something wrong with the diner itself. The hum of the jukebox, the quiet whispers of conversation, the way the air felt thick and damp, almost suffocating. Then the waitress came back. "Food's up," she muttered. I didn't even realize I'd ordered anything. But there it was, scrambled eggs, greasy bacon, toast. The usual. But it didn't smell like the diner's usual food. It had this unnatural, metallic scent to it. I picked up my fork, but before I could take a bite, the man in the leather jacket stood up. His movements were slow, almost deliberate. He walked across the diner, and as he passed me, he paused just long enough to lean in close. "Don't eat it," he whispered, his breath cold against my ear. "Leave now, before it's too late." I froze. My mind raced. Was this guy just messing with me? Maybe he was drunk. But the look in his eyes, it was something else. It was like he knew what was coming. I wanted to leave, really, I did. But when I looked up at the door, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The fog outside had thickened, and the diner's exit had vanished. The door, which had been wide open when I came in, was now completely sealed. The windows, too, like something was holding us all inside. I turned to the waitress, my heart racing. "What the hell's going on?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she reached under the counter and pulled out a small, rusted key. Then, she looked me dead in the eye, her face pale. "You should have listened to him," she said, almost whispering. "Now you're stuck, just like the rest of us." I could hear the man's voice again. "You think you're the first one to stop here? You think this is just some diner on a back road?" He took a step closer, his voice getting lower, more menacing. "Maggie's Rest is a stop for people who don't get to leave. You're trapped, just like the others." My pulse raced as I stood up, backing away from the counter. What the hell was happening? I felt my heart pounding in my chest, but the door wouldn't budge. No one else in the diner seemed to be reacting. They just stared, blank-faced, eating their food like nothing was wrong. I turned to the man, my throat tight with fear. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" He smiled. "You really think you're going to leave?" He pointed at the clock on the wall. The hands had stopped moving. Time itself seemed to be frozen here. You're not going anywhere. None of us are. And then it hit me hard. The man, the waitress, all of them, they were all the same. Trapped, stuck in time in this godforsaken diner. Just waiting for the next person to stumble in so they could add them to the collection. The man's voice echoed in my mind. You'll stay with us. Forever. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me, the terror creeping into my bones. There was no way out. Not this time. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I never saw anyone else leave the diner, and I certainly don't remember how I did. But the memory of those cold eyes, of the waitress's hollow stare, haunts me. If you ever find yourself on a foggy road late at night, and you see a diner just like Maggie's Rest, don't stop. Because some places, some diners don't let people leave. I've been trying to forget about that night, trying to move on. But I can't. I can't shake the feeling of those cold eyes on me. The eerie silence that hung over the diner like a fog you couldn't see but you could feel. When I finally stumbled out, dazed and sweating, I was sure I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just too tired, too hungry, too stressed out from work to think straight. Maybe the fog had messed with my head. But that thought didn't last long. Not when I saw the clock. It was just a few hours after I left Maggie's Rest. I had driven a few miles down the road, but something kept tugging at me, something unsettling gnawing at my insides. I pulled over to the side of the highway, looking out at the pitch-black night, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, expecting it to be around 3 a.m., but that's not what I saw. It read 2:17 a.m. I blinked, thinking I must have misread it. But no, it hadn't changed. And the strangest part? When I checked my phone, it too read 2:17 a.m. I shook my head, trying to clear the haze in my mind. Had I been gone longer than I thought? But I remembered clearly getting in my car at Maggie's Rest, leaving the diner. There was no way I had been driving for more than 15 minutes, yet here I was, stuck in some sort of time loop. I started my car and drove again, faster this time, trying to get out of this damn fog. The whole thing felt unreal. I kept my eyes on the road, the trees blurring past. But when I looked at the clock again, it hadn't changed. Still 2:17 a.m. The panic hit me like a slap in the face. My heart started to race again. I pulled over, grabbed my phone, and checked the time again. Still the same. That's when I saw something, or rather someone. In the reflection of my rearview mirror, a figure was standing behind my car. At first, I thought it was just another person stuck in the mist, someone walking along the side of the road. But then it hit me, the diner had been miles behind me. This figure shouldn't have been here. It wasn't moving, just standing there, staring. The hair on my neck stood up. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. My hands were shaking. The figure, dressed in tattered clothes, was tall, way too tall, and the face? Blank. No features. Just a smooth, featureless mask. It was like looking at a mannequin someone had left in the middle of nowhere. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding off down the highway, not caring about anything except getting away. But the figure stayed with me in the mirror, always behind me no matter how fast I drove. And that's when the whispers started. They were faint at first, like a low murmur in the back of my mind. But they grew louder, insistent. I couldn't understand the words at first, but then I realized they were saying one thing over and over again. You're still there. You're still with us. I slammed the radio on, turning the volume up as loud as it could go, trying to drown out the sound. But it didn't help. The whispers persisted, louder and louder, until it felt like the air itself was full of voices. And then the car stopped. Just stopped. The engine cut out, the headlights flickered, and I was plunged into darkness. The road was gone, replaced by an endless void of fog. I looked around, terrified. The figure in my rearview mirror was still there, now standing directly behind me, closer than it had been before. But when I turned to look out the windshield, the highway had disappeared. There was no road, no sign of civilization, only thick, choking mist. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The whispers now felt like they were coming from inside the car, from the very air I was breathing. The cold chill washed over me again, more intense than before, as if the temperature had dropped 30 degrees in an instant. I tried the ignition again. This time, the engine roared to life, and the headlights blinked on. But when I looked out the window, there it was. Maggie's Rest. Couldn't believe it. The same diner, the same glowing neon sign, flickering in the mist. But it wasn't just the diner that made my blood run cold. It was the faces inside. They were all staring at me. The same people from before, sitting in their booths, motionless, their eyes locked on mine. No one blinked. No one moved. I didn't know what to do. I had no choice. I had to get out. I had to get away from those eyes, those people. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't open. Panic surged again. I pulled harder, my heart slamming in my chest, but the door was locked. I looked back at the diner. The man in the leather jacket was standing at the window now, watching me with that same knowing smile. The same smile he had given me inside. Suddenly, the bell rang. The door opened just a crack, but no one came out. No one stepped forward. A voice, low and drawn, echoed from the other side of the door. "You'll stay with us now. Forever." I didn't think. Couldn't. I pulled the door open and bolted out of the car, running as fast as my legs could carry me. The fog was thick, suffocating, and the whispers followed me, like they were chasing me down. I ran straight into the trees, feeling branches scrape at my skin, until I stumbled out onto the road again. My heart was pounding in my chest. I don't know how I made it, but when I looked back, the diner was gone. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. I looked at my phone one last time, praying to see something, anything, that would tell me I was sane. But the time read 2:17 a.m. I'm still here, and I don't think I'm leaving. It's been over a week since that night, and I'm still not sure what happened. I've been to the police, I've tried talking to people who might understand, but no one believes me. I tried calling my friends to explain, but I can't bring myself to tell them. Sounds crazy, even to me now. It's like I'm stuck in this never-ending loop, trapped between reality and something darker, something beyond my comprehension. It started the moment I stepped into that diner. I know that now. That was the point of no return. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I swear to God, something is wrong with that place. There's no way to explain it logically, and I've spent days trying to piece it together. I keep thinking it's just a bad dream, but the things I've seen, no one could make them up. After I left the trees and found my way back to the road, I thought I was free. But the thing is, no matter how far I drove, no matter how many turns I made, I always ended up back at the diner. It was like the road itself was pulling me back. Like the whole highway had become some kind of trap, bending in on itself. It was impossible to escape, and I didn't even have to look for it. The diner always found me. The second time I saw it, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I was barely able to keep my eyes open when I pulled over to the side of the road. The fatigue was overwhelming. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel myself slipping into a kind of daze. The fog was back, thicker than ever. My head was pounding. I needed rest. That's when I saw the sign. Maggie's Rest. It was like the fog had swallowed up all the light, except for that damn diner, glowing bright as day in the distance. It was impossible to ignore. I pulled in without even thinking, feeling like I was being controlled by some unseen force. I parked my car and stepped out into the damp, chill air. The same feeling washed over me as I walked through the door. The bell above the entrance rang, a soft, melancholic chime that sent a shiver down my spine. The same group of people was inside. No one looked at me. They were still sitting at their tables, their faces blank, staring straight ahead. There was the man in the leather jacket, the waitress, even the old couple who had been at the counter when I first walked in. The only difference was that they weren't eating anymore. They weren't even moving. I sat at the counter, feeling like I was walking into a dream I couldn't wake up from. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, her voice as emotionless as it had been before. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. She placed the mug in front of me, and I took a sip without hesitation. It was the same. bitter, metallic, and cold. I didn't understand it. How was it even possible? How could I be here again? I tried to focus, to make sense of what was happening, but I couldn't. The more I looked around, the more the walls of the diner seemed to close in on me. The same low murmur of conversation filled the air, and the jukebox played that same country tune, repeating over and over again. The same song. I couldn't get away from it. I didn't even notice at first, but there was someone standing at the far end of the diner, watching me. I didn't want to look. I knew what it was. The man in the leather jacket. The one who had warned me before. This time, though, he wasn't just staring. He was smiling, his mouth stretched wide, and for the first time, I saw the horror that lay behind his face. His teeth were jagged, yellowed, and unnaturally long, like a predator's. The skin around his lips was stretched tight, almost too tight, and his eyes, they were hollow, black pits, voids that seemed to pull in the light around them. And then he spoke. "You're not leaving, kid?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "None of us leave. We're all stuck here just waiting for more souls to wander in." I stood up, my heart racing in my chest. The whispers, that low hum, started again, echoing around the diner, growing louder. "You're just like the rest of us now," the man continued, his voice cold and mocking. "Once you've been here, you belong. It's the price you pay. Don't think you can leave. You'll never make it out of this place. You're ours now." I stumbled backward, almost falling over the stool. I had to get out. I had to get away. My legs were shaking, but I ran toward the door, throwing it open with all the strength I could muster. But the same thing happened. The road outside was gone. The fog was too thick. I couldn't see past a few feet in front of me. The world outside had become a blur, and I was trapped. I turned back around, panic rising in my chest. The man was standing now, grinning, moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps. "You can't leave." The door slammed shut behind me, locking itself in place. The other diners hadn't moved, but I could feel their eyes on me, their hollow stares following my every movement. I was surrounded, and I knew deep down, they weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to break. The waitress appeared in front of me. I could see her eyes now, dead, lifeless. She was no longer human. "I told you," she whispered, her voice soft but chilling. "You're one of us now. I don't know what they want, what they're waiting for. But one thing is clear. I'm never leaving Maggie's Rest. None of us ever do. You want to know the worst part? I'm not even sure anymore if I'm the same person who walked in that night. And I know if you ever find yourself on that road, that highway that leads you to Maggie's Rest, you won't be either. Just don't go. Because if you do, you might never get out." I tried to leave again. You're probably thinking, why didn't you just get in your car and drive off? That's what I thought too. But that's the thing about Maggie's Rest. It doesn't let you leave. You can't just turn around, drive out, and go home like nothing happened. It doesn't work that way. You'd think the fog would lift, the diner would fade from view, and everything would go back to normal. But no, every time I tried to escape, I ended up right back there. The third time I drove away, I kept my eyes on the road, hoping the diner was just some twisted hallucination. But it wasn't. It was real. It's always real. I don't even know how I ended up back on the same road again. It's like the landscape itself shifts when you're near Maggie's Rest, pulling you back like a magnet. And the worst part is, it wasn't just the diner this time. No, this time I saw the others. The people who are stuck here too. I was halfway down the road, my hands trembling on the wheel, when I saw them in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks on me. But then, I saw the figures standing there in the mist. There were at least 5 of them, shadows that moved like people but weren't quite right. Their limbs were too long, too twisted. Their bodies hunched at unnatural angles, like they were contorted, trying to break free of their own skin. I could barely see their faces, just flashes of pale, sickly skin and wide, empty eyes. They were following me. I could hear their footsteps in my head, even though I couldn't hear anything outside the car. It was like they were walking beside me, just out of sight, never getting closer but never falling behind either. I tried to ignore it to keep driving, but every time I looked in the mirror, they were still there. That's when I saw it. The sign. The same glowing neon sign that I had cursed only hours ago. Maggie's Rest. I slammed my foot on the gas. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones. But it didn't matter. The road stretched on endlessly, a never-ending loop. No matter how far I drove, no matter how fast I pushed the pedal to the floor, I was always headed back toward that diner. It didn't matter what I did. I couldn't outrun them, and I couldn't outrun the hunger. I pulled into the diner, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was spinning, my breath shallow, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't escape. When I got out of the car, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A low growl. I turned around slowly. Standing at the edge of the parking lot were the figures I had seen in the mirror. They were closer now, their grotesque forms moving with a predatory slowness, like they were savoring every step. I don't know how I knew it, but I could feel it deep inside me. They were starving, and they weren't the only ones. As I walked back to the diner, the door opened on its own, the bell ringing softly above me. The familiar scent of stale coffee and grease filled my nose. I barely looked up as I stepped inside, but I could feel the eyes on me. I could feel them all watching. The man in the leather jacket was sitting at his usual spot. His grin was wider now, his eyes blacker than ever, and when he saw me, he made a small, satisfied noise. He didn't even need to speak for me to understand. He wasn't the one who was hungry anymore. They all were. I sat at the counter again, still in shock, trying to process what was happening. The waitress slid a plate in front of me without a word. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast. Same as before. Same as the first time I came here. But it didn't smell like food. It smelled like death. I didn't touch it. Couldn't. Instead, I turned to the man in the leather jacket. He was watching me, his grin still there, but his eyes were focused on something else now. I glanced behind me and saw the others, them, standing by the windows at the far booths. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at the food. They were watching the plate in front of me with an intensity one couldn't even describe. Their eyes were almost glowing in the dim light, burning with hunger. And then, as if on cue, one of them started moving. A woman at the back booth, her hair wild and unkempt, stood up. Her body lurched forward like she was too weak to support her own weight, but there was a desperation in her every movement. Her eyes never left the plate in front of me. She was starving, and I was the one with the food. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed the plate away from me, my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't enough. The moment I moved it, they all came forward, at the same time, like they had been waiting for this moment. The man in the leather jacket gave a low laugh, his voice scraping at my mind. "You don't get it, do you? You're not just stuck here, kid. You're the new meal." Before I could react, the woman lunged at me. I scrambled back, knocking over my chair, but it was no use. I could see the others, more of them, moving toward me, their hands reaching out with bony fingers. The worst part was the smell, the rotting, fetid stench of decay that came off them in waves. They were hungry, but not for food. They were hungry for me. I don't know how I managed to break free. I ran out of the diner, my legs shaking, the screams of the others ringing in my ears. But when I stepped outside, I saw them again. The figures from the road, the twisted, starving ones. They were closer now, surrounding the diner. I could hear them whispering in a language I didn't understand, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to stop. Not until they got what they wanted. And that's when I realized something I hadn't seen before. Maggie's Rest doesn't just trap you in time. It traps you in hunger. It makes you a part of it, and it feeds off your soul. You can't leave, and you'll never be free. If you ever drive down a foggy, forgotten road late at night, and you see a diner with a sign that flickers, just keep driving. Because if you stop, if you go in, there's no coming back. And worse, there's always someone hungrier than you. Always. It's been almost a month since that night at Maggie's Rest, and I'm not sure how to explain what's happening to me. I can feel it in my bones, deep inside my chest, A gnawing hunger that's not quite physical but feels just as raw. I've tried to ignore it, to pretend like it's just another symptom of stress. But it's not. It's the diner. I think it's changing me. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, the others. The ones who are stuck here with me. The man in the leather jacket, the hollow-eyed waitress, the twisted, starving figures that move with that terrible, unnatural hunger. When I finally managed to escape that night, barely, I thought I was free. I even made it back home. But it was a mistake. It wasn't a relief. Not really. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Every time I close my eyes, I'm there again, standing in the fog outside Maggie's Rest, hearing the sound of their breath, feeling their hunger. It never leaves me, and it's getting worse. 2 nights ago, I thought I'd snapped. I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like I was choking on something. My throat was dry, my skin crawling. I grabbed a glass of water, but it didn't help. The hunger, no, the need was still there, clawing at me. I stood by the window, staring out at the street, trying to calm myself down. I swear I saw something. A figure standing by the edge of my yard, hidden by the trees. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things. But when I looked again, it was there. The man in the leather jacket. He was standing there, right at the edge of the street, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to look away, to convince myself I was imagining it. But when I turned back, he was still there, a silent, waiting figure in the shadows. And then, like a switch flipped, I knew. I had to go back. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. It wasn't a choice. The hunger inside me was too strong. I knew what I had to do, so I got in my car. I drove through the night, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind racing. I had to make sure the others didn't follow me. I had to make sure they didn't get me. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how many turns I made, I ended up back at the same place. Maggie's Rest. The fog had thickened since the last time I was there, swallowing up the road in an impenetrable mist. The diner stood at the edge of the fog, glowing in the darkness like a beacon of something horrible. I didn't want to go inside. I told myself I shouldn't. But the hunger inside me, no, it wasn't just hunger, it was desperation. I needed to be there. I stumbled out of the car and walked through the door, the bell ringing again, the same sad chime that echoed in my mind. The same song was playing on the jukebox, that damn country tune. The air inside felt thick and heavy, like it was pressing against me, suffocating me. The familiar smell of grease and decay clung to everything, and the same group of people, no, not people but things, sat around the tables. Their eyes were on me, like they were waiting. I sat at the counter, my hands shaking as I waited. The waitress came over and slid a mug of coffee in front of me, her face expressionless. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw the coffee in her face and demand an answer. But I couldn't move. The hunger had me in its grip. Then I saw him, the man in the leather jacket. He was sitting in the corner again, staring at me with those black, empty eyes. And he wasn't alone. The others were standing around him now, like they were waiting for something. Like they were waiting for me. They were hungry. But this time, something was different. This time, I could hear their whispers. Low, urgent, like they were speaking to each other. But it wasn't in any language I knew. It was a growl, a hiss, a sound that made my skin crawl. They were communicating, planning, and I could feel it. They were getting closer. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey me. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, cracked, like there was no sound left in me. The hunger was pulling me in, drawing me closer to the counter, closer to the food that sat in front of me. But I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to be like them. I looked up, and that's when I saw it, the worst thing I could have seen. The plate of food in front of me wasn't just food anymore. It was alive. The scrambled eggs were squirming, the bacon twisted like it was trying to escape the plate, and the toast was breathing, slowly, like it was drawing in air, exhaling in a soft, tortured sigh. It wasn't food. It was flesh. I tried to stand, but the man in the leather jacket spoke, his voice as cold as ice. Don't run. It's too late for that now. You're one of us. And that's when I realized. I am one of them now. I can feel it. The hunger is inside me, gnawing at me from the inside out. Every breath, every moment, is filled with a gnawing, insatiable need. I can't stop it anymore. I don't want to. I don't know what they've done to me, but I know this for sure. I'm never leaving, and neither are you. If you find yourself on a foggy road one night, if you see a diner flickering in the distance, you better keep driving. You don't want to stop. You don't want to see what waits for you inside Maggie's Rest. Because once you walk through that door, you'll never leave. And if you think you're safe, if you think you can escape, just remember one thing. The hunger always finds you. I don't know how long it's been since that night at Maggie's Rest. Time doesn't work the same here. I wake up, or at least I think I wake up, and the world outside is just as it was before. A never-ending fog, an endless stretch of highway, and the diner. Always the diner. I try to tell myself that this is just some horrible nightmare. That if I could just fall asleep for real, I'd wake up in my own bed, with the warmth of the morning sun, the sound of birds outside the window. But when I try to sleep, I can feel the hunger creeping in again, wrapping its cold fingers around my chest, tightening with every beat of my heart. It's been weeks, maybe months, and I'm still here, still stuck. I thought maybe I could leave again like the first time I tried to run. Maybe I could drive far enough away from the fog, far enough away from Maggie's Rest. But every time, without fail, the road leads me back. I don't know how it happens. I don't know why it happens. But every time I pass that stretch of fog, every time I think I see the edge of it, the diner pulls me back. I don't even try to leave anymore. It's pointless. I've seen things I can't explain. Things that have begun to break me in ways I never thought possible. The people, no, they're not people anymore. They're all just waiting. Waiting for someone to stumble in. For the next soul to wander into their grasp. To be absorbed into the nightmare that's Maggie's Rest. They never talk to me anymore. They don't need to. I'm one of them now. I'm just as trapped as they are. Every night, I sit at the counter, the same plate of food in front of me. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast. But it's never really food. It's just the semblance of food, the twisted reflection of what a meal should be. The bacon moves when I look away. The toast breathes in shallow, agonized breaths. I tried to throw it away once, but the food never disappears. It always comes back. I don't eat it. I can't. But I can't stop staring at it. There's something about the way it moves, the way it pulsates, that draws me in. Every time I think about it, every time I try to look away, I feel the hunger rise. I'm starting to understand. You can't leave Maggie's Rest. Not ever. And you can't just stop eating. Not if you want to survive. Because the moment you stop, the hunger comes for you, and then you become the meal. I watch them sometimes, them, the ones who were here long before me. They don't blink. They don't speak. They just sit, waiting for the next person to wander in, to fill their insatiable need. And it's not just the food they want. No, it's worse than that. They want everything. They want to take your memories, your soul, your very essence. And you'll never even know it's happening until it's too late. I remember the first time I saw her, the woman who came in after me. She was stumbling, disoriented, like she'd just woken up from a nightmare. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, her clothes rumpled. I knew she had no idea what she was walking into. I knew because I was her. I watched her sit at the counter, just like I did, looking confused and scared. The waitress slid a cup of coffee in front of her, just like she did for me. But this time I saw it clearly. The woman didn't know what was happening. She didn't know she was already dead. I tried to warn her. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The others started to move toward her. They didn't rush, though. It wasn't like before when I ran for my life. No, they were calm, patient. The hunger was always there, gnawing at them from the inside, but they didn't need to chase her. She'd come to them just like I did. I watched, helpless, as they surrounded her. Their hands, twisted, bony, cold, reached out and touched her. The man in the leather jacket stepped forward, his smile spreading across his face. I heard him say it. "You're home now." The woman looked at him, confused. terrified. "Home? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. But he didn't answer. He just stood there, smiling, as the others closed in on her. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I felt myself drawn into the moment, into the same horror I had gone through. This is what happens to everyone. One by one, they started to feed on her. I couldn't see it exactly, but I could feel it. I could feel the way she began to fade, her essence slipping away into their empty, hollow bodies. And when it was over, when they were done, the woman was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just disappeared into the air like smoke, her soul devoured by the diner, by the hunger. And they were hungry again. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was happening to me too. I don't know how long I've been here now, trapped in this nightmare. I don't know if time even matters anymore, but I've seen enough to understand the truth. Once you walk into Maggie's Rest, there's no escape. You're not just trapped in a time loop or stuck in some endless fog. You're feeding the hunger, and the hunger never stops. It just waits. It waits for you to give in, for you to become like them. And when you do, when you finally let yourself take that bite, that one bite that breaks you, you'll understand. You'll understand why the diner never lets anyone leave. You'll understand why there's always another soul waiting to walk in. Because this is what it does. It feasts. I don't know if anyone else will ever get the chance to leave. I don't know if it's possible to break free. But if you ever find yourself on a foggy, forgotten road, and you see a diner with a sign that flickers in the mist, don't stop. Because once you walk in, there's no coming back. You'll become a part of the feast, and the hunger will never, ever be satisfied. I thought I could fight it. I really did. I thought that if I kept my distance, kept my mind sharp, I could resist the pull of Maggie's Rest. But that's the thing about hunger, it doesn't care. It doesn't wait for you to get strong enough. It doesn't wait for you to figure out a plan. It just waits until you're weak enough to give in. I've been here too long now, longer than I care to admit. The fog is thicker than ever, the air heavier, like it's pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. The diner never changes, the same flickering sign, the same half-eaten meals, the same endless loop of faces that look at me with hollow eyes, waiting. They're always waiting, but now I understand them. I understand what they're feeling because it's what I feel now too. Hunger, desperation. The truth I had been avoiding for so long finally hit me. I'm not just stuck here. I am the next meal. It's too late for me to leave. Every time I tried, the road never ends. It loops back around, like the world itself is playing a cruel joke, making me face the same nightmare over and over again.